Harold, a 78-year-old widower, is humiliated at his granddaughter's wedding when the bride's family places him at an isolated table outside with a sign that reads, "Unwanted." Feeling rejected and wounded after years of being treated as a burden by his own family, Harold is ready to leave when something unexpected happens. The groom, Marcus, notices the situation and takes an action that will completely change Harold's perspective on family, belonging, and the value of his own story. An emotional journey about dignity, intergenerational respect, and the discovery that sometimes true family comes from the most unexpected places. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of my small apartment, casting long shadows across the worn carpet. I stood before the mirror, adjusting my only good suit, the same navy blue one I'd worn to Martha's funeral 3 years ago. My hands trembled slightly as I worked on the tie, not from age but from something else entirely. Excitement? Nervousness? I couldn't quite place it. Today was Emma's wedding day. My granddaughter Emma, the little girl who used to climb onto my lap every Sunday after church, begging me to tell her stories about the old days. The same Emma who would sneak into my workshop and watch me carve wooden toys for hours, her eyes wide with wonder as shavings curled away from my whittling knife. I picked up the small wrapped gift from my kitchen table, a hand-carved jewelry box I'd been working on for months. Every detail had been carefully considered. The delicate rose pattern on the lid, the smooth mahogany finish, the tiny brass hinges I'd saved money for 3 months to buy. Inside, I'd placed a note with a poem Martha used to recite to Emma when she was little. The drive to the Riverside Country Club took longer than expected. My old Buick wheezed and coughed through the morning traffic, and I found myself gripping the steering wheel tighter with each mile. When was the last time I'd been to such a fancy place? When was the last time I'd been anywhere that required this suit? The country club's circular driveway was already busy with activity. Valets in crisp uniforms directed expensive cars toward parking areas, while wedding guests in designer outfits made their way toward the entrance. I pulled up behind a gleaming Mercedes, suddenly very aware of my car's rusted bumper and the duct tape holding the passenger side mirror in place. "Sir, may I park your vehicle?" A young valet approached with a professional smile. "Oh, well, I suppose..." I fumbled for my keys, not used to such service. "Beautiful day for a wedding," he added kindly, helping me out of the driver's seat. "Yes, it is. My granddaughter's getting married today." His smile widened. "Congratulations, sir. I'm sure it'll be wonderful." Walking toward the entrance, I could see clusters of people I didn't recognize. Marcus's family, I assumed. They looked polished, confident, like they belonged in places like this. I caught glimpses of conversations about vacation homes in the Hamptons, business deals, stock portfolios. This was a world I'd never been part of, even when Martha was alive. Inside, the lobby buzzed with pre-ceremony activity. Flower arrangements the size of small trees stood at every corner, and everything seemed to glitter under the crystal chandeliers. I looked around for familiar faces, hoping to spot Emma, or perhaps my daughter Linda. "Harold?" a voice called from across the room. Linda appeared, looking stunning in a deep purple dress I'd never seen before. But her expression when she saw me, it wasn't the look I'd hoped for. It was the same look she'd been giving me more and more lately, the look that said I was a complication she hadn't planned for. "Dad, you made it," she said, her voice carrying that forced cheerfulness I'd grown to dread. "I wasn't sure if, well, with your car and everything. The Buick got me here just fine, Linda. Wouldn't miss Emma's big day for anything." She glanced around nervously. "Right, well, about that. There's been a small change with the seating arrangements." My stomach tightened. "What kind of change?" "Well, you see, Marcus's family is quite large, and with all the business associates they needed to accommodate." She was talking faster now, the words tumbling out like she'd rehearsed them. "And honestly, Dad, some of the family felt that maybe it would be better if you sat somewhere a little more quiet." "Quiet? You know how you get sometimes. The stories, the comments about the way things used to be. Today needs to go perfectly, and Marcus's parents are very particular about these things." The gift box in my hands suddenly felt heavier. "I see. It's nothing personal, Dad. It's just that this is Emma's special day and we want everything to be perfect. You understand, don't you?" Before I could respond, a wedding coordinator approached with a clipboard and an overly bright smile. "Mr. Patterson, I'm Janet, the wedding coordinator. I'll show you to your seat." Linda looked relieved. "See, Dad, Janet will take good care of you." I followed Janet through the main reception area, past tables draped in white linen and adorned with centerpieces that probably cost more than my monthly social security check. We walked past the head table, past tables clearly marked for family members and important guests, past the tables near the dance floor. We kept walking, through the French doors that led to a small patio area behind the main reception hall. The space was barely 20 feet from the building, but it might as well have been 20 miles. A single round table sat there, set for one, with a metal folding chair that looked like it had been borrowed from a church basement. But it was the small white card propped against the single-place setting that made my heart stop completely. In elegant script, it read simply, "Unwanted." Janet's voice seemed to come from very far away. "I'm so sorry about this, Mr. Patterson. I argued against it, but the family insisted. They said you'd be more comfortable out here away from the noise and commotion." I stared at that card, reading and rereading those 8 letters. Unwanted. The word seemed to grow larger with each glance, filling my vision until it was all I could see. "This is my spot." My voice sounded strange, hollow. "I really am sorry," Janet whispered, glancing back toward the main hall. "I've been doing weddings for 15 years, and I've never... This isn't right." I set my carefully wrapped gift on the table next to the card. My hands were steady now, steadier than they'd been all morning. Something had crystallized inside me, something cold and final. "Thank you, Janet. I appreciate your kindness." She lingered for a moment, clearly uncomfortable. "The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. I can try to find you a different seat if you'd like." "No," I said quietly. "This is apparently where I belong." After she left, I stood alone on that patio, looking through the French doors at the celebration I wasn't welcome to join. I could see Linda laughing with a group of women, see relatives I'd known for decades mingling with strangers in expensive suits. Everyone looked happy, relaxed, like they'd just solved an unpleasant problem. The unwanted grandfather, tucked safely out of sight. I thought about leaving then, just walking away, getting in my old Buick, and driving home to my quiet apartment where no one had to be embarrassed by my presence. But something kept me rooted to that spot. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the hope that Emma would look for me, would wonder where her grandfather was. Or maybe it was just that after 78 years on this earth, I'd finally reached the point where I had nothing left to lose. Through the glass doors, I watched as guests began to take their seats for the ceremony. I could see the main aisle decorated with white roses and ribbon, see the altar where Emma would soon stand with Marcus. This was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life, watching my granddaughter start her new chapter. Instead, I was standing outside like an unwelcome dog, relegated to a table marked with my shame. I picked up the card again, turning it over in my weathered fingers. Such a small thing to carry such enormous weight. 8 letters that somehow managed to summarize how my own family saw me. Not as a patriarch with stories to tell and wisdom to share. Not as a grandfather who'd worked double shifts for 40 years to help pay for Linda's college education. Not as a husband who'd loved their grandmother with every fiber of his being until the day she drew her last breath. Just unwanted. The sound of music drifted through the doors as the ceremony began. I couldn't see much from my position, but I could hear the wedding march. Could imagine Emma walking down that aisle in her white dress, radiant and beautiful. My little Emma, all grown up and starting her own family. A family that apparently didn't include me. As I stood there holding that cruel little card, I made a decision. After today, I wouldn't put myself through this anymore. No more forcing myself into family gatherings where I was clearly a burden. No more pretending that things were fine when they obviously weren't. If this is how they truly felt about me, then maybe it was time to accept it and stop fighting for a place where I wasn't wanted. The music swelled, and somewhere inside my granddaughter was promising to love and honor the man she'd chosen to spend her life with. I whispered my own quiet blessing for her happiness, even as I began to plan my exit from theirs. But as I prepared to leave, folding that hateful card and slipping it into my jacket pocket as evidence of this moment, I heard footsteps behind me on the patio stones. I turned around slowly, expecting to see Janet returning with some other unwelcome news, or perhaps a security guard coming to escort me away from even this remote corner of the celebration. Instead, I found myself face to face with a young man in an impeccably tailored black tuxedo. It took me a moment to recognize him, without the nervous energy he'd carried during the rehearsal dinner 2 nights ago. Marcus, the groom. "Mr. Patterson," he said, and there was something in his voice I couldn't quite identify. Not pity, not embarrassment, something else entirely. "Marcus," I straightened my shoulders, trying to summon whatever dignity I had left. "Shouldn't you be inside? I believe you have a wedding to attend." He glanced back toward the French doors, where I could see the ceremony still in progress through the glass. Actually, I was looking for you. When I didn't see you in your assigned seat, he stopped mid-sentence, his eyes falling on the table behind me. I watched his face change as he read the card. The polite smile faded, replaced by something that looked almost like anger. What the hell is this? He picked up the card, staring at it like it was something poisonous. It's where your new family thought I should sit, I said quietly. Apparently, I'm a bit too colorful for the main event. Marcus looked from the card to me, then back to the card. His jaw was set in a way that reminded me of my own father when he was trying to control his temper. This is unacceptable, he said, his voice tight. Who did this? Does it matter? They're not wrong, you know. I'm getting old and I do have a tendency to ramble about the old days. I probably would have embarrassed someone. Stop. The word came out sharper than I think he intended. He softened his tone. Mr. Patterson, with all due respect, that's bullshit. I blinked, surprised by the language and the vehemence behind it. Do you know what Emma told me about you on our second date? He continued. She said her grandfather was the smartest man she knew, that you could fix anything, build anything, and that you had more stories than the public library. She said you were the one who taught her that family means showing up no matter what. Something tight in my chest began to loosen slightly. She said that? She talks about you all the time, about the wooden dollhouse you built for her when she was 7, about how you taught her to drive in your old pickup truck in the church parking lot when she was 15, about the way you held her when her parents were going through their divorce, how you told her that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, but that doesn't mean the world is ending. I had forgotten about some of those moments, or maybe I'd convinced myself they didn't matter as much to her as they had to me. Marcus crumpled the card in his fist. And now they put you out here like you're some kind of inconvenience? Like you're not the man who helped raise the woman I'm about to marry? Marcus, it's really... No, it's not okay. He was pacing now, 3 steps in each direction on the small patio. Emma doesn't know about this, does she? I shook my head. She's got enough to worry about today. Besides, maybe they're right. Maybe I don't fit in with all this. I gestured toward the elegant reception visible through the doors. He stopped pacing and looked at me with an expression I'd seen before, but not often. It was the look of someone who was seeing me as a person, not a problem to be managed. Mr. Patterson, can I tell you something? I nodded. My grandfather died when I was 12. Lung cancer. He was a mechanic, worked on cars his whole life, always had grease under his fingernails no matter how hard he scrubbed. Marcus's voice softened. He wasn't educated, didn't have money, didn't fit in with my parents' friends, but he was the best man I ever knew. He sat down heavily in the single chair at my table, looking suddenly older than his 32 years. I would give anything to have him here today, to have him see me get married, to hear him tell Emma embarrassing stories about when I was a kid, to have him ramble on about the old days and how things used to be better. He looked up at me. And you're telling me I should be grateful that Emma's family decided you're unwanted? The word hung in the air between us, and I saw him flinch as he said it. I'm not Emma's family, he continued. Not yet, officially. But in about 10 minutes I will be. And I'm telling you right now, this is not how my family treats people. This is not how we treat the people we love. Through the glass doors, I could see the ceremony was winding down. The officiant was speaking. Emma and Marcus's stand-ins were at the altar. Wait, stand-ins? Marcus, I said slowly, if you're out here with me, who's... He grinned, and for the first time since he'd appeared on the patio, he looked like the happy groom he was supposed to be. My brother David is about my height and build. In the tux, from the back, no one can tell the difference. Emma knows, she's in on it. You interrupted your own wedding to come out here. I interrupted my wedding to come find my new grandfather, he said simply, because Emma told me that if you weren't there to see her get married, it wouldn't feel real to her. The tightness in my chest was back, but this time it was different. This time it felt like something breaking open rather than closing up. She said that? She said that. Marcus stood up and straightened his tie. Now, Mr. Patterson, I have a proposal for you. A proposal. You can stay out here if you want. You can let them win, let them make you feel small and unwanted. Or, he held out his arm, you can walk back in there with me, take your rightful place in the front row and help me marry your granddaughter. I stared at his outstretched arm. But the seating chart, your parents, Linda, let me worry about all that. The question is, do you want to be there when Emma becomes Mrs. Marcus Sullivan? If this part of the story has touched your heart, tell me from which part of the world you are listening to this. I would love to know that somewhere out there, in cities and towns I may never see, there are people who understand what it feels like to wonder if you still matter. I looked through the glass doors one more time. I could see Linda near the altar. could see Marcus's parents in the front row, could see all the people who had decided I didn't belong. Then I looked at Marcus, this young man who had left his own wedding ceremony to come find me, who saw value in an old man that his new family had dismissed. "You know," I said, taking his arm, "I've been to a lot of weddings in my time, but I've never had the groom personally escort me to my seat." "Well," Marcus said, opening the French door, "there's a first time for everything." As we walked back into the reception hall, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the sense that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, with exactly the right person by my side. The conversations around us began to quiet as people noticed the groom walking arm in arm with the old man who was supposed to be hidden away. Linda's face went white when she saw us. Marcus's mother looked confused, but Marcus didn't slow down, didn't acknowledge the stares or whispered questions. He walked me straight to the front row to a seat that had clearly been reserved for someone else, someone important. "Your seat, Mr. Patterson," he said loud enough for the front 3 rows to hear. As I settled into the plush chair, Marcus leaned down and whispered, "By the way, Emma specifically asked me to make sure you brought your camera. She wants pictures of you giving her away." "Giving her away? But I thought Linda—" "Emma says the person who raised her should be the one to give her away, if you're up for it." I looked toward the altar where Emma was standing, radiant in her white dress. Even from this distance I could see her watching us, could see the smile spreading across her face as she realized what Marcus had done. For the second time that day, my hands trembled as I reached into my jacket pocket. But this time, instead of pulling out a card marked Unwanted, I pulled out the small digital camera I'd brought to capture every moment of this day that had gone from being the worst of my life to something I couldn't have imagined in my wildest dreams. The whispers started immediately. As Marcus walked back toward the altar to rejoin the ceremony, I could feel eyes on me from every direction. Linda was making her way through the seated guests, her face a mask of barely controlled panic. Marcus's parents were leaning toward each other in urgent conversation, but none of that mattered, because Emma was walking down the aisle now, and she was looking directly at me. Her smile was radiant, but I could see tears gathering in her eyes. Not tears of sadness, I'd seen enough of those in my lifetime to know the difference. These were tears of joy, of relief, of something being exactly as it should be. When she reached the front of the aisle, instead of going directly to Marcus, she stepped over to where I was sitting. "Grandpa," she whispered, loud enough for the front rows to hear, "I was so worried you weren't going to make it." "I almost didn't, sweetheart." She leaned down and kissed my cheek. "Thank you for being here. Thank you for being you." Before I could respond, she had moved to take her place next to Marcus, but the damage, if you could call it that, was already done. Everyone in that reception hall now knew exactly where Emma's priorities lay, and it wasn't with the seating chart or social protocol. The officiant, clearly confused by the earlier interruption, and now this deviation from the script, cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of Emma Patricia Patterson and Marcus James Sullivan." As the ceremony continued, I found myself thinking about all the weddings I'd attended over the years. My own, of course, in 1967, in the tiny Methodist church where Martha and I had met in Sunday school. Linda's wedding 25 years ago, where I'd walked her down the aisle with pride swelling in my chest. Countless friends and relatives over the decades, each celebration marking a new beginning, a new chapter in the great book of family. But I'd never been to a wedding where the groom had to rescue the bride's grandfather from exile. "The couple has written their own vows," the officiant announced. "Marcus, please begin." Marcus took Emma's hands in his, and when he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the hushed reception hall. "Emma, when I first met you, you told me that family wasn't just about blood. It was about showing up, about being there for the people you love, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's hard, even when other people don't understand." I felt something catch in my throat. Those were almost the exact words I'd said to Emma during her parents' divorce. "You showed me that through your grandfather," Marcus continued, glancing briefly in my direction. "A man who taught you that love means being present, that wisdom comes from experience, and that every person has value regardless of their age or their bank account or whether they fit into someone else's idea of perfect." Linda, who had finally made her way to the front row, sank into a seat across the aisle. Her face had gone from panic to something approaching shame. "So I promise you this," Marcus said, his eyes back on Emma. "I will show up. I will be present. I will value every member of our family, the one we're creating together, and the one that raised you to be the incredible woman you are." I will never let anyone feel unwanted or unwelcome in our home, because you taught me that family means everyone gets a seat at the table. The emphasis he placed on everyone and seat at the table wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. Emma was crying openly now, happy tears streaming down her cheeks. When it was her turn to speak, she had to take a moment to compose herself. "Marcus, you asked me once what I wanted our marriage to look like. I told you I wanted it to look like my grandparents' marriage. 52 years of showing up for each other, of choosing love every single day, of building something beautiful together, one conversation, one shared meal, one quiet evening at a time." She turned slightly to look at me. "My grandfather taught me that love isn't just a feeling, it's a decision. It's the decision to see value in someone even when they're difficult. It's the decision to include someone even when it would be easier to exclude them. It's the decision to honor someone's place in your life even when other people question it." The reception hall was completely silent now. Even the catering staff had stopped moving around. "So I promise you," Emma continued, turning back to Marcus, "that I will choose love every day. I will choose to include rather than exclude. I will choose to see the best in people rather than focus on their flaws. And I will make sure that our children know where they come from, know the stories that made them, know that they are part of something bigger than themselves." When the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union, the silence stretched on for what felt like forever. I held my breath, half expecting someone from Marcus's family to stand up, to voice what many of them were probably thinking about the disruption to their perfect day, but no one spoke. "Then by the power vested in me by the state of New York, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Marcus, you may kiss your bride." As they kissed, the reception hall erupted in applause, but before the couple could walk back down the aisle together, Emma broke away from Marcus and walked over to me. "Grandpa," she said, offering me her arm, "would you escort me to the reception?" The traditional recessional called for the couple to leave together, followed by the wedding party, then the parents. But Emma was rewriting the script again, and I realized this wasn't improvisation. This was planned. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" "I've never been more sure of anything." As we walked arm in arm down the aisle with Marcus following behind us, I could see the faces on either side. Some smiled, genuinely moved by what they were witnessing. Others looked confused, uncertain about this break from protocol. But a few, including some of Marcus's relatives and, I'm ashamed to say, some of my own, looked distinctly uncomfortable. When we reached the back of the reception hall, Emma squeezed my arm. "I need to tell you something, Grandpa." "What's that?" "I knew about the seating arrangement. I knew they were planning to put you outside." I stopped walking. "You knew?" "I found out yesterday. I was picking up some last-minute items for today, and I overheard Mom on the phone with Marcus's mother, discussing how to handle the grandfather situation. Her voice carried a bitter edge I'd rarely heard from her. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I wanted to see who would stand up for you. I wanted to see who in this family, my new family and my old one, understood what you mean to me." She looked back toward Marcus, who was greeting guests as they filed out of the ceremony space. Marcus passed the test with flying colors. "And your mother?" Emma's expression tightened. "Mom has some explaining to do." As if summoned by our conversation, Linda appeared at my elbow, her face flushed and her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Dad, we need to talk." "I think we do," I said quietly. "Not here. Not now. Today is about Emma." "Today was supposed to be about Emma from the beginning," Emma interjected, her voice cool. "That's what makes this so disappointing, Mom." Linda flinched as if she'd been slapped. "Emma, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You were embarrassed by Grandpa. You were worried about what Marcus's family would think. You decided that their comfort was more important than his dignity. Where are you watching this story from?" "I would love to know which city you are joining me from," as we witness Emma standing up for the people she loves. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Marcus's parents, William and Catherine Sullivan. They approached our small group with the kind of careful expressions people wear when they're not sure if they're walking into a minefield. "Emma, dear," Catherine said, her voice carrying the refined accent of old East Coast money. "What a lovely ceremony. Though I must say it was quite unconventional." "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan," Emma replied, her arm still linked with mine. "I'd like you to meet my grandfather, Harold Patterson, the most important man in my life after Marcus." I extended my hand to William Sullivan, a distinguished man in his 60s who looked like he'd stepped out of a country club catalogue. His handshake was firm, professional, and completely devoid of warmth. "Mr. Patterson," he said, "we've heard so much about you." "I'm sure you have," I replied evenly. Catherine's smile was perfectly polished and about as genuine as a $3 bill. "We're so glad you could join us for this special day." The hypocrisy was breathtaking, but I'd lived long enough to recognize political maneuvering when I saw it. They were backtracking, trying to smooth over what had become an embarrassing situation now that Emma had made her position clear. "Actually," Marcus said, appearing beside his parents, "I was hoping to ask Mr. Patterson something." All eyes turned to him. "Sir, I know this is last minute, but would you consider giving a toast at the reception?" Emma and I were talking, and we realized that no one knows more stories about her growing up than you do. Catherine's perfectly applied makeup couldn't quite hide the tightening around her eyes. A toast meant the spotlight, meant the microphone, meant this old man they'd tried to hide would be front and center at their carefully orchestrated reception. "Marcus," his mother said carefully, "we already have the toasts planned. Your father, the best man. We can make room," Marcus said firmly. "I think our guests would love to hear from Emma's grandfather." I looked at Emma, who was beaming at me with such pride and love that I felt my chest swell. Then I looked at Linda, who was pale as parchment, clearly terrified of what I might say, with a microphone in my hand and a captive audience. "I would be honored," I said. The cocktail hour passed in a blur of awkward conversations and sideways glances. I found myself the center of attention in a way I hadn't been prepared for. Some people approaching with genuine warmth, others with the kind of curiosity you might show a zoo animal that had escaped its enclosure. Marcus stayed close, introducing me to his friends and business associates as Emma's grandfather, the man who raised her. Each introduction felt like a small victory, a reclamation of my place in this family narrative that others had tried to edit me out of. But it was the conversation I overheard while standing near the bar that really opened my eyes to what was happening behind the scenes. "I can't believe they're letting him speak," a woman's voice whispered urgently. I recognized it as Catherine Sullivan's sister, Margaret, whom I'd met briefly during the receiving line. "It's a disaster waiting to happen," came another voice. "Linda, my own daughter. You don't understand. He gets confused sometimes, rambles about things that happened decades ago. What if he says something inappropriate?" "Can't you talk to Emma?" Margaret asked. "Surely she'll listen to reason." "Emma's not listening to anyone right now. She's furious with me, and honestly, I don't blame her. But this isn't about hurt feelings. This is about protecting everyone from potential embarrassment." I stepped closer, pretending to examine the elaborate ice sculpture while straining to hear more. "What exactly are you afraid he'll say?" This was a male voice I didn't recognize. Linda's laugh was bitter. "With Dad, you never know. He might tell the story about Emma's first period and how he had to explain tampons to her because I was out of town. He might talk about the time he caught her sneaking out to meet that boy when she was 16. Or worse, he might start talking about Mom's death, about how I wasn't there when she passed because I was at some conference in Chicago." The words hit me like a physical blow. Is that really how Linda saw me? As a walking collection of embarrassing stories and uncomfortable truths? "Harold?" I turned to find Marcus beside me, holding 2 glasses of what looked like expensive whiskey. "You look like you could use this," he said, offering me one of the glasses. "Thank you." I accepted the drink gratefully, my throat suddenly dry. "You heard them talking, didn't you?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "For what it's worth," Marcus said quietly, "Emma wants you to tell exactly those kinds of stories, the real ones, the ones that show who she really is, where she really came from. Your family might not appreciate that kind of honesty." Marcus took a sip of his whiskey and looked around the elegantly appointed reception room. "My family has spent so much time worrying about appearances that we've forgotten what substance looks like. Emma's been trying to teach me that for 2 years now." Before I could respond, the wedding coordinator approached with her ever-present clipboard. "Mr. Patterson, we're ready to move into the reception hall. You'll be speaking right after Mr. Sullivan," that's Marcus's father, "and before the best man." As we made our way to our assigned table, the head table where I found myself seated between Emma and Marcus's youngest brother, I caught sight of my gift still sitting on that lonely table on the patio. In all the commotion, I'd forgotten about it entirely. "Emma," I said, leaning toward her, "I have something for you, but I left it outside when they tried to make you eat alone." Her voice carried just enough edge to make the people around us look up from their salads. "I'll get it," Marcus said, already standing. "What does it look like?" "It's wrapped in silver paper. It's on the table out on the patio." As Marcus disappeared toward the French doors, Emma took my hand under the table. "Grandpa, I need to tell you something else." "What's that, sweetheart?" "The reason I wanted you to give a toast isn't just because I love you. It's because I want everyone here to understand what kind of man raised me. I want them to hear about the values you taught me, the sacrifices you made, the love you showed, even when it wasn't easy. Emma, I want them to know about the time you drove 3 hours in a snowstorm to bring me soup when I had the flu my freshman year of college. I want them to know how you worked overtime for 6 months to buy me that used car for my 16th birthday. I want them to know that when I was afraid to tell mom and dad I was changing my major from pre-med to education, you're the one who said, "Life's too short to spend it making other people happy at your own expense." Marcus returned with my gift, setting it carefully beside Emma's place setting. She unwrapped it with the same careful attention she'd given to presents as a child, saving the paper, taking her time with the reveal. When she lifted the lid of the wooden jewelry box and saw the note inside, she began to cry again. But she read Martha's old poem aloud anyway, her voice strong despite the tears. A granddaughter is a gift from above, a treasure to cherish and love. She brings joy to each day in her own special way, like a bright star that shines from above. The table had gone quiet, and I realized that several people were listening to Emma read. "Grandma used to recite that to me every time you tucked me in when I stayed at your house," she whispered. "I remember. I'm going to read it to my daughters someday, and I'm going to tell them about the grandfather who carved this box with his own hands, who remembered every word their great-grandmother used to say." The dinner service continued around us, but I barely tasted the food. My mind was racing, thinking about what I would say when the microphone was placed in front of me. Linda's words kept echoing. "You never know what he'll say." She was right, in a way. They didn't know what I would say, but maybe it was time they found out. The toasts began with William Sullivan, who spoke eloquently about Marcus's accomplishments, his bright future, the merger of two fine families. It was a speech that could have been delivered at any upper-class wedding in America, polished, appropriate, and completely forgettable. Marcus's best man followed with the traditional mix of embarrassing childhood stories and heartfelt wishes for happiness. The crowd laughed at the right moments, applauded at the end, and settled back into their conversations. Then Janet, the wedding coordinator, was at my elbow with a wireless microphone. "Mr. Patterson, you're up." I stood slowly, my 78-year-old knees protesting after the long day. The room gradually quieted as I made my way to the small stage area where a microphone stand waited. If you have ever lived something like this, leave me a comment telling me from which country you are listening to me. Sometimes the most important words we speak are the ones people don't expect to hear. I looked out over the reception hall at the faces turned toward me in various states of curiosity, anxiety, and expectation. Linda looked like she was about to be sick. Catherine Sullivan wore the expression of someone bracing for impact. Marcus was leaning forward, encouraging. Emma was beaming. I cleared my throat and began, "Good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Harold Patterson, Emma's grandfather. I'm the one who was supposed to be sitting outside tonight." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter ran through the room. Linda actually put her head in her hands. "But I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about Emma." I paused, looking directly at my granddaughter. When Emma was 7 years old, she asked me to build her a dollhouse. Not one of those plastic ones from the toy store. She wanted a real one, with real furniture and real electricity. So I spent 6 months in my garage, working every evening after my shift at the plant, building her a 3-story Victorian dollhouse, complete with working lights and miniature furniture I carved myself. I could see some people settling back in their chairs, probably expecting a rambling story about woodworking. But here's what I really built during those 6 months, I continued. I built a relationship with a little girl who would sit in my workshop every Saturday morning, handing me tools and asking questions about everything. Why does wood split that way? Why do you measure twice and cut once? Why does Grandma hum when she's happy? The room was completely quiet now. I built trust with a child who knew she could tell me anything, about the kids who were mean to her at school, about being scared when her parents fought, about her dreams of becoming a teacher, just like her second-grade teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez. I saw Emma wipe her eyes with her napkin. I built traditions with a girl who would help me in the garden every Sunday after church, who learned that the best tomatoes come from patient nurturing, that weeds have to be pulled when they're small before they take over, and that sometimes the most beautiful flowers grow in the places you least expect. My voice was growing stronger, more confident, and most importantly, I built a foundation with a young woman who would grow up knowing that love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up. It's about being present for the small moments and the big ones. It's about seeing value in every person, regardless of their age, their status, or whether they fit someone else's idea of appropriate. I looked directly at Marcus. Marcus, when you married Emma today, you didn't just marry a woman, you married a family, all of us. The polished parts and the rough edges, the convenient relatives and the inconvenient ones, the stories that make us look good and the ones that make us human. The silence in the room was profound now. Emma learned those values not despite where she came from, but because of it. She learned them from a grandmother who worked double shifts as a nurse to help pay for her education. She learned them from parents who made mistakes but never stopped trying. And yes, she learned some of them from an old man who rambles about the past sometimes, because the past is where wisdom lives. I paused, letting that sink in. So my toast tonight is not just to Emma and Marcus. It's to family, the messy, complicated, imperfect institution that shapes us, challenges us, and loves us anyway. It's to the understanding that we don't get to choose where we come from, but we do get to choose what we do with that inheritance. I raised my glass. To Emma and Marcus, may your marriage be built on the same foundation that raised her: unconditional love, unwavering support, and the understanding that family means everyone gets a seat at the table. The applause started slowly, then built until the entire room was standing. But I wasn't looking at the crowd anymore. I was looking at Emma, who was crying and clapping and mouthing "I love you" across the room. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The aftermath of the speech was unlike anything I had experienced in my 78 years. As I made my way back to my seat, people I'd never met before stopped me to shake my hand, to tell me how moved they were, to share their own stories about grandparents who had shaped their lives. But it was the reaction from my own family that surprised me most. Linda was waiting for me when I reached the head table, her eyes red with tears. I hadn't seen her cry since her mother's funeral. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." I pulled out my chair and sat down heavily, the adrenaline from speaking beginning to fade. "Linda, no, let me say this, please." She glanced around, then leaned closer so our conversation wouldn't be overheard. "I was wrong, not just about tonight, but about everything. I've been treating you like a burden instead of treating you like my father." The honesty in her voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the defensive Linda I'd grown used to, the one who always had an excuse ready. "When did I become so worried about what other people think that I forgot what you think, what you feel?" She wiped her eyes with her napkin. "When did I start seeing you as an embarrassment instead of seeing you as the man who raised me? Linda, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. Because listening to you speak tonight, I realized something." She took a shaky breath. "All those stories I was afraid you'd tell, they're not embarrassing stories, Dad. They're love stories. They're stories about a man who showed up for his granddaughter in ways that I haven't been showing up for you." Across the table, I could see Emma deep in conversation with Marcus, both of them glancing over at us occasionally with expressions of hope and concern. "I want to change that," Linda continued. "I want to do better. I want to be the kind of daughter who deserves the father I heard speaking tonight." Before I could respond, we were interrupted by William Sullivan approaching our table. The patriarch of Marcus's family looked different somehow, less rigid, more human. "Mr. Patterson," he said, extending his hand. "That was quite a speech." "Thank you." "No, thank you. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten." He glanced back toward his own table, where Catherine was engaged in animated conversation with several other guests. "My father was a plumber, worked with his hands his whole life, never made much money, didn't have what you'd call sophisticated manners." I waited, sensing there was more. I spent most of my adult life trying to distance myself from that background, trying to become someone who belonged in rooms like this. He gestured around the elegant reception hall. "But your speech reminded me that my father was the most honorable man I ever knew, and I dishonored his memory by being ashamed of where I came from." The conversation was interrupted by the band starting up, signaling the beginning of the dancing portion of the evening. Emma and Marcus took the floor for their first dance as husband and wife, and watching them move together, I felt a contentment I hadn't experienced in years. "Grandpa," Emma appeared at my elbow as the song ended. "Would you dance with me?" "Oh, sweetheart, I'm not much of a dancer these days. You taught me to dance in your living room when I was 8 years old. You can manage one more dance with me." As we made our way to the dance floor, the band struck up "The Way You Look Tonight," the same song Martha and I had danced to at our own wedding reception 55 years ago. "You planned this," I said, as Emma placed my hand on her waist and took my other hand in hers. "Marcus helped," she admitted. "I wanted this moment with you." We moved slowly across the floor, and I was surprised to find that my feet still remembered the steps Martha had taught me all those decades ago. "Emma," I said as we swayed together, "I need to tell you something." "What's that?" "When I woke up this morning, I thought today might be the last time I'd see the family. I was planning to step away, to stop forcing myself into places where I wasn't wanted." She pulled back to look at me, alarm in her eyes. "Grandpa, but what happened today, what Marcus did, what you did? It reminded me that family isn't about being wanted or unwanted. It's about choosing to love and be loved, even when it's messy, even when it's complicated. It shouldn't have taken all this for people to see what you mean to us. Maybe not, but sometimes we need to be reminded of what we already know." I think that's what happened tonight for all of us. As the song ended, Emma hugged me tightly. "I love you, Grandpa, and I'm proud to be your granddaughter." The rest of the evening passed in a warm blur of conversation, laughter, and connection. I found myself talking with Marcus's relatives about everything from gardening to military service to the challenges of raising children in different eras. These were the kinds of conversations I'd missed, the kind where people saw me as a person with experiences worth sharing rather than an inconvenience to be managed. Near the end of the night, as guests were beginning to say their goodbyes, Marcus found me sitting at a table with some of his cousins, deep in discussion about the differences between farming practices in the 1950s and today. "Mr. Patterson," he said, "Emma and I are getting ready to leave for our honeymoon, but I wanted to talk to you first." I excused myself from the conversation and followed Marcus to a quieter corner of the reception hall. "I have a proposition for you," he said. "Another one?" He smiled. "Emma and I have been talking, and when we get back from Italy, we'd like you to come stay with us for a week. We want to hear more of your stories, and we want you to tell us about our family history. We're thinking about starting our own family soon, and we want our children to know where they come from." "Marcus, that's very kind, but it's not kindness, sir. It's selfishness. We want what you have, that connection to the past, that understanding of what came before. We want our kids to grow up knowing their great-grandfather's stories." The word great-grandfather hit me with unexpected force. Children, Emma and Marcus's children, who would carry forward not just their DNA, but their values, their stories, their understanding of what family meant. "I'd be honored," I said simply. As Emma and Marcus prepared to leave, surrounded by well-wishers throwing rice and taking pictures, Emma broke away one more time to hug me. "Thank you for staying," she whispered in my ear. "Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for not giving up on me." As I watched their car disappear into the night, I realized that this day had changed everything. Not just my relationship with Emma and Marcus, or even with Linda, but my understanding of my own worth, my own place in this family I'd helped build. I wasn't unwanted after all. I had just forgotten how to recognize love when it was offered and how to demand respect when it was withheld. Tonight I remembered both. 3 months later, I was in my kitchen making coffee when the phone rang. It was Emma calling from their honeymoon in Italy, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Grandpa, you'll never guess what happened. Tell me, sweetheart. We were visiting this little village outside of Florence, and we met this elderly man named Giuseppe who reminded me so much of you. He was telling everyone stories about the old days, about how the village used to be, and everyone gathered around to listen. Marcus said it was exactly like watching you at the wedding reception after your speech." I smiled, settling into my favorite chair with my coffee. "It sounds wonderful, but that's not why I'm calling." Her voice took on a different quality, softer, more serious. "Grandpa, I'm pregnant." The coffee mug slipped slightly in my hands. "Emma, are you serious? We just found out yesterday. We're only 6 weeks along. But we couldn't wait to tell you. You're going to be a great-grandfather, Grandpa. Great-grandfather." The word carried weight I hadn't expected. Another generation, another chance to pass along the stories and values that had shaped our family. "Have you told your mother? You're the first person we've called. We wanted you to know first because..." She paused, and I could hear Marcus in the background saying something. "Because we want to ask you something." "What's that?" "When the baby is old enough, will you teach him or her to work with wood? Will you tell them the stories about great-grandma Martha? Will you help us give them the same foundation you gave me?" I had to set down my coffee cup entirely because my hands were shaking too much to hold it steady. "Emma, nothing would make me happier. There's something else." Marcus's voice came on the line as he took the phone from Emma. "We've been talking and we want to name the baby after you if it's a boy. Harold Patterson Sullivan. What do you think?" For the second time in the conversation, I found myself speechless. to have your name carried forward, to know that some part of who you are will live on in a new generation. It's a gift I never expected to receive. I think, I said carefully, that would be the greatest honor of my life. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my quiet apartment for a long time, thinking about everything that had changed since that day at the wedding. The unwanted card was still in my jacket pocket. I'd kept it as a reminder, though of what, I wasn't entirely sure. Maybe as proof of how wrong people can be about each other, maybe as evidence of how quickly everything can change. Linda had been true to her word about wanting to do better. She called me every few days now, not with the dutiful obligation I'd grown used to, but with genuine interest in my day, my thoughts, my memories. Last week, she'd brought over a box of old photographs and asked me to tell her the stories behind them. Stories she'd heard as a child but had forgotten as an adult. The knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. Through the peephole, I could see Janet, the wedding coordinator from the country club, holding what looked like a large envelope. "Mr. Patterson," she said when I opened the door, "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I got your address from Emma before she left for her honeymoon." "Of course, come in. Would you like some coffee?" "That would be lovely, thank you." As I poured her a cup, she opened the envelope she'd brought. "I wanted to show you something," she said. "After the wedding, several people asked me for copies of the speech you gave. Apparently, word has gotten around the wedding industry about what happened that night." She pulled out what looked like a printed article. "This appeared in Elegant Weddings magazine last month." I put on my reading glasses and looked at the headline, "The Power of Inclusion, How One Grandfather's Speech Redefined Family Values at a Wedding." "They interviewed Emma and Marcus," Janet explained. "The article talks about how your speech has inspired other couples to reconsider their own family dynamics, to think about who they're including and excluding from their celebrations." I read the article slowly, amazed to see my words quoted, my story told to an audience I'd never imagined reaching. "But that's not the main reason I'm here," Janet continued. "I have a favor to ask." "What kind of favor?" "I've been contacted by 3 different couples who heard about what happened at Emma's wedding. They want to know if you'd be willing to speak at their weddings, not formal toasts, but just sharing your perspective on family, on what marriage and commitment really mean." I looked up from the article. "You want me to become a professional wedding speaker?" She laughed. "I want you to keep doing what you did that night, reminding people what really matters." The idea was intriguing, but also overwhelming. "Janet, I'm 78 years old. I'm not sure I have the energy to—" "Mr. Patterson," she interrupted gently, "do you remember what you said in your speech about wisdom living in the past? These young couples need to hear from someone who's lived through 50+ years of marriage, who's raised children and grandchildren, who understands what it takes to build a family that lasts." Over the following weeks, I found myself thinking more and more about Janet's proposition. The first couple she'd mentioned reached out to me directly, a young woman whose own grandfather had passed away, and her fiancé who came from a family where the older generation was often dismissed as irrelevant. Their story reminded me of Emma and Marcus, of the hunger young people have for connection to something bigger than themselves, something rooted in experience and wisdom. I agreed to speak at their wedding, then the next one, then the one after that. 6 months later, I found myself standing in another elegant reception hall, this time as an invited guest speaker rather than someone's inconvenient relative. As I looked out at the faces in the audience, some young, some old, all connected by their love for the couple being celebrated, I thought about how strange life could be. I thought about that card, still in my pocket, marked Unwanted. I thought about Emma, now showing with her pregnancy, glowing with the joy of impending motherhood. I thought about Linda, who had started joining me for Sunday dinner every week, bringing photo albums and asking me to help her remember our family history. I thought about Marcus, who called me every few days just to check in, to ask my advice about everything from home repairs to marriage challenges. Most of all, I thought about belonging, how it's not something that's given to you, but something you claim for yourself, how sometimes the people who love you most forget to show it, and sometimes strangers see your worth more clearly than family does. But the deepest truth I'd learned was this: your value doesn't decrease based on someone else's inability to see it. As I began to speak to this new couple, this new family, this new beginning, I pulled the Unwanted card from my pocket one last time. Instead of keeping it as a reminder of pain, I decided to transform it into something else entirely. Before I share some thoughts about marriage and family, I told the assembled guests, I want to tell you about a card I received at another wedding not too long ago. I held up the card so everyone could see it. This card taught me something important about how we define ourselves and how we let others define us. It taught me that sometimes the people who label us unwanted are really just afraid of what we represent. Authenticity in a world that values appearance, wisdom in a culture that celebrates youth, depth in a society that skims the surface. Where are you watching this story from? I hope that wherever you are, you remember that you are never unwanted when you know your own worth. I tore the card in half, then in half again, letting the pieces fall to the floor. But most importantly, this card taught me that we always have a choice. We can accept other people's definitions of our worth, or we can define it ourselves. The applause that followed wasn't for the dramatic gesture, but for the recognition of a truth we all carried, that we've all felt unwanted at some point, that we've all questioned our place in the world. As I finished my speech and returned to my seat, I thought about the little Harold Patterson Sullivan growing in Emma's belly, about the stories I would tell him, about the values I would help instill. He would never sit at a table marked unwanted, because he would grow up knowing that his worth came from within, that his place in the family was secure, that his voice mattered. And if anyone ever tried to convince him otherwise, he would have his great-grandfather's story to remind him that sometimes the most unwanted people become the most essential ones. Sometimes you just have to wait for the right person to see it.